Welcome to your next challenge entitled Reverse Coding Challenge Number 1. This is a reverse coding challenge. Normally you're given explicit directions with how to create a function. Here you must generate your own function to satisfy the relationship between the inputs and outputs. Your task is to create a function that, when fed the inputs below, produce the sample outputs shown. And I think you can figure this out pretty clearly from the examples, but in case you can't, you'll notice that basically the input alternates between letters and numbers. And so it's basically a letter and then a count. So in that output, notice how they have 4 A's. It says A4, so make 4 A's. It says B5, so it's followed by 5 B's. C2, put 2 C's. And you can see that same thing going on in the rest of these examples. So I think that's clear now. We'll go over to code. Be sure to pause the video now and have a go at this, and then come back whenever you're ready. Okay, I'm going to use some link methods. We're going to look at the string as an enumerable collection of chars, which we've been over many times. We know that's what it is. And so let's say string. I'm going to start with the select method. And if you remember, this allows you to iterate over each element in the collection and do some kind of transformative operation to it. And we also have seen in previous examples that there's an option with this select method where you're allowed to bring the index in as well, which is quite handy if the processing you have to do needs an index value. Then you're not forced to use a for loop where you write out say an int I variable to hold the index value. You can have an index value in this select statement too. That's pretty handy. So I'm going to use that version of the select method. Feel free to consult the documentation if you need a refresher on that. And I've been using ch as shorthand as my variable name for a char, which we know each element is going to be a char because this is a string. And then we saw we can simply add this second parameter, index, which will be the whatever index, the element that we're at in the collection, and it will get incremented each time. And so we know the lambda function goes in here. We've got 2 parameters in our method, and now it's time to write our method body. Since mine's going to span multiple lines, I'm going to define a scope for it with these curly braces, and I'm going to write my statements on separate lines just like I would in the body of a function. So we've got basically 2 cases to handle then. If we're on an even numbered index, we know we're getting that letter value first. And if it's an odd numbered index, then we have a count of how many times to repeat that letter. So we can handle the first case. And we know how to check if a number is even by now pretty well. We can say if index modulo 2 equals 0, we know we have an even index value. So this is a letter, but remember right now it's in the form of a char. Since I ultimately want to return a string for my transformation through this select method, I'm going to make all of my output into strings. So my new collection produced by this select method is going to be a collection of strings. So for this, I'm simply going to say, take that character, just convert it to a string, and return that. So it's important to note that at this point I have one of the characters printed already. And so I'm making an assumption that I would never get a 0 value for the number part, which would be pretty ridiculous, right? Why would you type out the letter with 0? To me, that doesn't really make sense. But, you know, you could handle that if you wanted to. I'm not doing any other error checking either. In theory, you would probably want to go through the string before you even started this processing to make sure that it indeed alternates between letters and numbers. And maybe you'd want to make sure the numbers weren't too high. But yeah, so list one of them. And then for the second part, if I get past this case, that means I'm dealing with an odd number, right? It would have returned and exited on. It would have incremented the index and gone to the next element in the collection had this been even. So at this point we're odd and we know we're dealing with the number value. So I want to know what that value is. And there's a way to extract a number from a char. And I don't think we've used this method before, but in the char class it has this getNumericValue method. That's quite handy. It converts a specified numeric Unicode character to a double precision floating point number. We don't need the double, but that's what this method does. And notice the overload here with char. That's what we're dealing with, our chars. If you want to see the example, I find them quite helpful. You can see how it took 8 here, and yeah, output's 8. So we're going to use, just like this call here, char get numeric value. Char get numeric value, and we want to pass it the character that we have. Now remember, this get numeric value returns a double, so let's cast it to an integer. We don't need double precision for this. That's overkill for what we're doing here. We just need a count. So we have that at this point, and now we need to determine the letter to use, right? So since we have that index value, we can say char previous char, and we'll call that the input string. We could say index -1, right? That would be the previous character. So right now we're at the number value. We're just saying go back 1 to see what letter preceded that number value. And we're going to repeat it. And then in terms of building another string for this iteration of the loop, we can say return. We know the string constructor has an overload that takes a character and a count. So we can say take the prev char and do it count times. But remember, if we do count, that'll do 1 too many, because in our first, when we were on the previous letter, we added the character already. We did it 1 time. So we're actually going to go count -1 here, since we already specified 1. If you had just returned an empty string here or something like that, then you could use count. But since I added 1 copy of the letter here, I'm taking count -1. So this covers both cases. It should go through then and do what we want it to do. At this point, we have a collection. I'm going to use the handy var keyword where I don't have to type out the whole type. Oh boy, this thing's freezing up. There we go. So let's do this to make it a collection. It's an enumerable of type string, right? Because we're returning strings here. So our new collection was transformed. It's not chars anymore, they're strings. Enumerable of string. And let's close that statement off at the semicolon like we need to. And then you recall from previous challenges, the string class has this handy join method that will take a bunch of separate strings and sort of mash them all together and put them into one single string, which is what we need to return here. And we're allowed to specify a delimiter character here if we want spaces between them. Remember, in our previous challenge, I think we used space, but you could imagine commas would be very common. In this case, we're just going to go empty string. We don't want anything dividing the letters. That's how the output was specified in the instructions, if you recall. It was just one complete string there with no spaces. So I'll do that, and then we give it the collection to join. So we're saying don't separate them. This is empty. There's nothing to separate them with. put them all together, take this result collection, and join them all together. And then I can return that. That should produce the lone string result that I need. And I think that should cover us. I did bring in length. What else do I need? Did I miss anything? Might need system for this char class. Let's put that up. Okay. I'll give this a spin. There we go, we got it. Nice. So yeah, I really like this select, how they give you the option of having the index. We normally do it, most commonly we just have the one parameter there, the char, but it's nice that you have that option if the index is useful to you while you're working, which it was for me in this case. Yeah, and then our string collection was started out as an enumerable of char type. Since we were returning strings every time as we processed elements, we built up this collection of strings. So it's important to remember that the type of the result is an IEnumerable of string. And then finally, given a collection of strings, the string class has this handy method join, which allows you to put them all together into one string with any kind of separation or none, if you like. So that covers that. There are no doubt more clever solutions than this. I'd love to see them. Otherwise, hit me up with questions as needed, and we'll see you in the next challenge. Thanks.